see me downstairs, but I'm one of the coordinators of this conference. I also recently graduated from Lawrence, where I was an avid slug member. And so the reason why I wanted to have this presentation about the basics is because I feel like a lot of us have experience working on farms. Like, I've interned on a couple farms, I've worked in the slug garden, things like that, but if you aren't in control of the project, you might not necessarily know like the planning that goes into it. How do you decide like where the beds went when they started the garden? Where are they planting things like that. And also, it's also good information to know if you are just starting your student garden, which hopefully a lot of you were inspired by John Eckert. I know I was, and are like really dumb homes and go home and start something. So I have a lot of stuff to cover in a short amount of time, so some of it's going to be pretty brief, but there'll be time for questions at the end. So throughout my presentation, I'm going to reference slug and kind of the way we do things and the way we're set up, so you can get to know more about that. So the first thing I'm going to start out with is choosing your location. So this is obviously an important part of your garden, and there's some qualities in a piece of land that you're looking for. One is aspect and slope, so the way that the piece of land is oriented. Reading any farming book, essentially they say the ideal thing would be like a southwest facing slope. Southern slope is great. This way you get a lot of sunlight, and the slope makes it so that the soil is warming up faster, and that way you get an advantage on the market. So you can have production for the farm next door that's on like an east or west slope or something like that. So this is a picture of the slug garden from its very, very early days. You can tell they're just like tilling, it's still grassy. And so the way the garden is oriented is, I guess you guys all probably, did everyone see the garden out the back? So when you go out the campus center, you can look out the big windows on this side, is that west, and you can see the garden. So what's happening here is there's a big hill, Union Hill, and then it kind of flattens out, and the garden is right at the bottom of it, but it continues slightly sloping down and will go all the way down into the river. Let's see here. So then you want to think about what's around your garden. One, you want to think about sunlight, like how much sunlight is your area going to get. You usually want 6 to 8 hours. But you can negotiate with the sun and say like, oh, well, this part of my land isn't getting as much, and there's certain crops that can thrive in that environment, like broccoli or kale or something like that. So you can just utilize all your space, even though it might not be ideal. You also want to know the history of the area, like what pollutants were in that area or could still get in there. For example, because we're on this slope, if Lawrence was spraying like a ton of ridiculous chemicals on that hill, they're just going to wash right onto our garden. So you want to be careful of that. Maybe some nearby farmers are spraying, something like that. So you just always want to keep that in mind. Also, wind protection is a really good thing to have. Oh, and also, going back to sunlight, another thing, trees and shrubs compete for sunlight, but they also compete for like root competition. So you want to stay like at least 10 feet away from where you see like the roots and the tree branches coming over, just to make sure that you're getting a safe distance. Let's see here. So, the pages are sticking. All right, so wind protection. You don't want your area to be not protected from the wind, because too strong of a wind can really harm all your little baby plants, and you don't want that to happen. So a lot of people will put up windbreaks, and those are usually in the form of shrubs or like a line of trees, even a fence, that will just reduce the airflow and protect all your precious vegetables. Another thing though you want to keep is air movement, because when there isn't a lot of air movement, like a stagnant air can promote disease and pest problems. So another thing to think about is access and visibility. We got super lucky with the location of slug. This building that we're in right now actually wasn't around when slug was put in there. So this was just kind of like a foresty area, and now you know, you walk in the building and you can see it. Most people on campus know where it is. It's also great for community members because there's like a river walk going by the road, so you know all the runners in the morning are going down this path, and they're like, oh yeah, there's a slug garden, and they know what's going on, they know what we do. Also, something I've found is that people are lazy, and it's really nice not to have to go far out of your way to, like, I don't want to walk a mile to go to the garden. Well, I probably would, but not if I didn't know about it, not if I wasn't involved. It's so much easier to be like, hey, I'm just going to drop by in between class. And then the more, you know, you get addicted to gardening, the more likely you're going to go out of your reach. And also, it's really easy the way our site is set up to bring materials we need. We compost from the campus center, so we can just bring it across the road. And we can access the garden with a truck and bring in the materials and tools we need. So another thing we want to think about is the soil. There's so many aspects to soil. I know at first I would always get overwhelmed, being like, do I need to worry about this? Like, do I have sandy loam? Do I have clay? Like, what's going on? But there are a lot of ways to figure that out. Like talking to extension agents in your region or seasoned farmers is a great way to like figure out your specific soil type. And then other things you want to think about are like the soil depth to the bedrock, to the water table, and then how much topsoil you have. Usually places, I believe, have 4 to 12 inches, and you can kind of tell by digging, and you know, the topsoil is darker. And then also you want to test your soil for contaminants and also the pH levels. The alkalinity of the soil can affect how your vegetables grow. Up here on the slide I have the pH levels that are ideal for most vegetables, tomatoes, potatoes, raspberries, etc. I believe slug has about a 7 on the pH scale. So that's pretty good. And then also, this is probably my biggest point about the soil, it's amenable. And this is a picture I took from, like, I was trying to find an example of, like, a garden someone installed in, like, a tennis court or a parking lot. And I found this. It's from Ohio, like, some university in Ohio, and they're, like, doing tests to see what, like, the minimum amount of soil is they can put on a parking lot and still grow things. And so that's what it's all about, is you can change the soil, you can compost, you can add so many different materials, and also you don't even need soil on the bottom. You can start a garden anywhere. Like, we could start growing things along the side of this room. We could pick anywhere and grow things. And that's one thing I always would tell to new slug members is, like, things grow. Like, these aren't plants. They've been growing forever. Like, you make a little bit of a mistake, like, just keep going, because maybe it won't be as productive or as efficient, but it's going to happen, and you're going to learn from it, and you're just going to keep going. So another thing you want to think about in urban environments is lead contamination. And so that's always something to get tested. I know Hava, I think, did ours here, but you can get it tested by an extension agent. The test, I think lead contamination is like $15, and then ranges from like 9 to 15 for your pH levels and all those sorts of things. And an example I have about things growing everywhere is some of us took a sustainable agriculture tutorial, and we have like a northern retreat campus up in Door County. It's called York Linden, and we were doing a feasibility study on whether or not installing a garden up there to feed the lodge would be a viable option. And we spent so long trying to figure out, like, what would be the best for here, like what would be the least amount of work we needed to do here, the easiest for the chefs to prepare, etc. And we chose fruit trees, apples. You harvest the apples, you eat the apples. Like, great, you can eat them raw, you can bake them. You know how to do that. And we measured the soil depth to the bed, and we ended up hitting the bedrock at, like, I don't even remember how many feet it was, maybe 3 to 4 feet. And we were like, oh wait, maybe we can't grow trees. So we're like, we'll call UW Extension Agency, they'll know what to do. We called them, and they're like, no, don't do it, like, they aren't going to hold there. And 2 weeks later, someone who lived by this site told us that there used to be an apple orchard So, and that it was thriving, and around the area where the bedrock, like the soil was that close to the bedrock. So you can do things everywhere. All right, so next I'm going to go into layout. So before you choose the size or type or whatever the layout of your garden, there's a bunch of questions you need to ask yourself or ask your group. So what are your plans for production? You need to think about like your long-term goals, your short-term goals. What are you going to do with your produce? You know, are you going to give it away for free? Are you using it for education purposes? Are you going to hold a big meal? Whatever. And we'll go into like different ways that a lot of campuses have arranged their business models later. And then also you want to know how much time you're able to spend. Like, is this you and a friend? Or is this you and 20 other people? Are you recruiting volunteers from a local community center? Are you bringing in people? So you don't want to overcommit yourself, because getting worn out is something that you don't want to happen. Like, that's not sustainable. And then also you want to leave potential for future expansion. You know, maybe your garden is thriving in 2 years and you want to keep expanding. So just like think about your future plans as you're planning your initial layout. So a good way to establish what you're going to do is to map it out. Here, I don't even know if you can see this, but we have a layout of the slug garden. And so things we know we have that we would work around when deciding where we want our beds to be is, for example, so right in here is the entrance. To the right when you're entering, we have a 3-bin compost system so that we're able to compost a lot of the food waste coming from the campus center, coming like brew mash from local breweries and coffee grounds from local coffee shops. We also have included like this big grassy area because we really wanted this to be a community space. We want it to be open, we want people to integrate. So if, you know, we're having a potluck, that's where we can go. We have space to be down there. We always, you know, bring kids and do like a big circle and talk about the garden before we go into the garden. And it really just gives them a congregating place. And then we also have a shed there at the bottom, which is, you know, obviously great storage. And then, so then you need to think about your garden beds. If you are on a flat piece of ground going north-south, is a really good option, because if you're practicing sustainable agriculture and doing crop rotation, you don't want to have some crops that are taller than others and block access to the sun. And then something you want to think about is whether or not you're going to do raised beds. Raised beds will help the soil heat up quicker, and they'll also retain heat much more efficiently than a normal bed. You can plant more intensively, there's more space for the roots to grow down, there's looser soil so it's easier to weed, easier to maintain, and it also looks really nice. And a lot of campuses are worried about, you know, we don't want some sloppy garden coming when the alumni are here or something like that, so it really gives it a little more like tidy and formal look. And then they're also great for like planting invasive plants, like let's say you don't want mint to go everywhere in your garden, like plant it in a container. So they do add time to like your initial setup as well as cost, but they usually can last for about 5 years before you need to, you know, before your boards start rotting or something starts falling apart. And then when choosing the size of your raised beds, you want to think about who is using the garden. Is this an education garden? Because if it is, kids are tiny. You know, they aren't able to, you want them to be able to reach the middle of the bed and be able to access everything. So slugs are 4 feet wide, but if you had kids, you might want to do 2 feet, something like that. When I asked the garden manager at the time why our beds were 4 feet wide, he said, because I'm 6'3", and I can reach the middle. It's like, well, I can't. And he's like, you know, that's something you don't even think about. So you need to take into consideration who's going to be there. And then also, same goes with the paths. You want to make sure that you can fit in a wheelbarrow, or you can, you know, have a pile of kids trailing behind you, and everyone can fit. So this is mapping out a garden with the plants. So this is part of that feasibility study that I was talking about at our Northern Retreat campus. This is a pencil drawing, and it's turning out much lighter than I expected on here. But, so what you see, the interesting thing about this is south is the top. But so down here, we have, it starts with perennials, so we have a bunch of apple trees. And those are at the north because obviously those are going to grow and get really big and they would shade out anything else. Then we come to raspberries, rhubarb, herbs, and then have a series of raised beds going north-south. So that's just thinking about like what are we planting, and we don't want them. We want everything to thrive, not certain things more than others. So there's definitely a way to do that. So other things you want to think about when planning out your garden, which I guess is more of this slide, is access to water. Maybe being able to bring in your compost easily, having an open and gathering space, as I mentioned, and then also future potential. Maybe you want to grow in a greenhouse or do some cold frames, things like that. So leaving room. So now we're getting on to long-term maintenance, crop rotation. And so the two main reasons you rotate crops is to prevent disease and pests, as well as promote soil fertility. So crop rotation, the definitions is up there, but it's the idea that you don't plant the same thing in the same bed on a yearly basis. So some people do a 2-year crop rotation. I think Elliott Coleman endorses like an 8 to 10-year crop rotation, but we're going to talk about a 3-year crop rotation. So you first want to make sure that they don't have like the same demands of the soil, and so people will sort them by family or botanical classification. This is a simplified version. Instead of going through all the plant families, like Solanaceae, like nightshades, things like that, they're kind of clumped into more like root crops, greens. So combining some of the families that are really similar and have similar qualities, and that just makes it easier when you're planning. There's just like less different things going on. And then, so this next slide, at first when I was looking at that, I was like, oh, there's still a lot of things, like how do we manage that all? But just going down, thinking about just what you're growing, it really reduces, the amount you're rotating. And so another thing you want to consider during the crop rotation is by nutrients. So there's 3 classifications that I'm going to talk about, which are heavy givers, heavy feeders, and light feeders. So the heavy givers fix nitrogen, and these are mainly like your cover crops. So we often do a bunch of oats and buckwheat, and they're just going to give the soil a really nice rest and restore everything, or restore a lot, so that your next crop will flourish. And so from there, we go on to heavy feeders. And those, most commonly, people know as like, potatoes or tomatoes, things like that, and they are just using a ton of nitrogen and kind of depleting the soil. And then our in-between would be the light feeders, which are, taking away from the nutrients of the soil, but not necessarily as bad as the heavy feeders. And so the different qualities of these crops really help the soil nutrients, and so that's because of their various root depth, and just because you're having so many different types of plants, they're all utilizing different things from the soil. And so this is just a graphic of crop rotation, just to really lay it out and make it visual. It's really simple, 3 years, 3 beds. And then there's other things you can take into consideration when you're planning your crops. Maybe you are doing a market and you want to just be like, well, I'm going to harvest all these from the market, I'm just going to put them together, it'll save me some time. Or, doing companion planting, like basils and tomatoes and chives. Or maybe, all these will need to be weeded or hoed at the same time, and so the cultivation requirements make it easier to just put them together. So now we're on to potential business models. I'm trying to see what time it is. And so there's a bunch of different models that student gardens use. I think SLUG would fall pretty strongly into the first category, which is education. And a lot of these are college and grant funded. And originally SLUG started out with the mission of being like financially sustainable, but eventually we realized like there's this university here, let's use its money. And so we do get money for a lot of educational things, like we can send students to the Moses Conference. We can get a grant for some beekeeping materials. So it's really nice just to once we open that up, so our garden can produce enough money to pay for its summer workers, but we can also take advantage of a lot of the resources around us, which we aren't going to get in any other environment. And that's one thing that is so cool, I think, about student gardens, is like the access to the resources. These are like incubators. They're incubators for your future, for social entrepreneurship. Like there are so many skills that these gardens are giving us that we can use in our future. And so depending on what business model you choose, you're going to be learning different skills. So a lot of, like a common two business models that you often see are people selling to the campus community. We sell to our on-campus dining services as well as some housing cooperatives on campus. There's 3 of them. And then people often have market stands. I know Evergreen just has, instead of having like a farmer's market stand at a local farmer's market, they just are like, we'll be at this spot on campus these 2 days a week. And people come on a regular basis to buy eggs and things like that. You can also source to like local delis or restaurants, or as well as having a CSA, which is more of an intense thing. You have to be really accountable for that. Winter production is a great way to make money. Winter greens are a big deal. People love them. They're really expensive. Salad greens, salad mixes. 4-season growing is the new moneymaker. And then also value-added products. Maybe you're really good at canning and have access to a certified kitchen, something like that. There's so many ways to make money. Selling compost, collecting other people's compost. Sometimes you can, because you're saving them the delivery weight, the delivery cost of them getting rid of it, you can kind of get money from that. Maybe you're selling worm castings. Maybe you're selling your seeds. So just on the bottom I have like get innovative. So I feel like there's so many things that people are doing or we haven't thought of, and there's a lot of ways to make whatever you want to do work. So deciding which one, I think it really comes down to interest. You don't want to be growing a vegetable that you don't like, at least not at the beginning. And then also just maybe like knowledge base. If you have a little bit of knowledge, why don't you go for an educational garden, because you're educating yourself in the process. And then also commitment, how many people are on board, as well as what resources at your disposal. Like maybe the farmer next door said that he'll help you, set up your garden in this way, and you have all this expertise, so why not take advantage of it? And so then on the right, I have some examples, and I think a lot of these are examples of social entrepreneurship, which is like leadership, accountability, and then record keeping, because all these are going to keep your program going, essentially. Like, you don't want to have a CSA and not be accountable, because next year, no one's going to want to share in your CSA. You really want to make sure that you aren't overcommitting yourself while still, having fun and feeling like you're learning something. So this is an enterprise budget, which is essential to, figuring out if you're profitable. So I'm assuming you can all see that, but what this is, some of these are blank, but it's just going through. So an enterprise budget is doing analysis on a certain scale. So you can do it, per acre. You could do it per market outlet. You could do it per whatever you want. And in this case, I'm doing it per bed. Slug's beds are 4 feet by 40 feet. And so I'm doing one on tomatoes here. And so we just have it go down. You want all your information, so you can look back this next year and know what you were talking about. And then when you come down here, so we're trying to figure out labor hours and expenses and seeing if we're still going to make a profit. So first we have soil preparation. How long does that take? It goes through planting, transplanting, weeding, putting in all your stakes, doing all your trellising, doing harvesting. And so then it comes down to 13 and a half hours, which is pretty low. These estimates are based off of, I actually, over last summer, worked with a couple friends, and we mainly just grew tomatoes, and so we had it down to like a pretty tight system. So I think when you have a lot of people who don't really know what they're doing, it's going to take longer than this. And then we have that we're assuming that we're making $10 an hour, which it's good compared to Wisconsin minimum wage, but I know an employee at Growing Power doing this is making at least $23 an hour. So we're just figuring that out. And also, so then you figure out, your gross revenue minus your related expenses and your labor costs, and that's going to figure out your profit. Pretty self-explanatory. And trying to think about what point I was just going to make. Oh, so this is just a good basis to think about how, what is viable for you to set up. So the $135 here, that would be payment for a worker. For Slug is free. We have volunteers. Everything is volunteer-based. So we get to negate all that. And so maybe you have crops that aren't going to make it possible for you to pay a summer worker, so emphasize winter production. Make it when you're here. One thing Slug does is it really tries to push the season forward and back, because we can't sell to the dining service in the summer. We can maybe if they're having a fancy event, they'll want some greens, but the majority of our production, we want it to go to use. So we try to get a really early season and then push everything back as late as possible. And for planting schedules like that, you can open up pretty much, or a variety of planting schedules, you can open up pretty much any book on farming, and they'll have a really nice graphic for you. And so then here, a cash flow projection. I didn't go through the actual format of it, but you really want to think what's going in and what's going out, keeping track of all your costs so you know what you're doing. And so you need to think through all your startup costs, obviously, and yearly costs. But one thing you really want to think about is the additional value that's not money, like the educational process. Or the idea, what John Eckert was talking about is that there's so much value in doing good, doing what's ethical, thinking about the soil, thinking about others, thinking about the earth around us, and getting a lot of nutrients out of the food you eat. And I think you'll be surprised, at least I hope, that a lot of universities really value that. Being green is really cool now. It's really becoming easier and easier to take advantage of that to do good things. Lawrence started out, supporting Slug, and now, we're on their pamphlets. They love us. They love being look at all our gardeners. And it's great. We help them, they help us, and it's really done a lot for us. So I have a list of resources here, a lot of books that I like. Because I have a lot of experience working on different types of farms and things like that, I know the basics. There's so many details that I always have to go back and reference in a book. So these are some resources. If you want, I can keep them up or send them to you or something like that. But yeah, so that's the end of my presentation. Now I'm going to open up to questions. Hopefully I can answer them. You can ask questions about this, Slug, just getting people involved. I'm not sure, how much time do we have left?
15 minutes.
Okay. Does anyone have questions? No? Yes?
So this is a campus-based garden, the Slug?
It is, yeah. So it's a student-run campus garden. It's about 1/4 of an acre right there across the bridge. And so it's all volunteer-based, and we hire a couple of summer workers to keep it maintained over the summer. And then all the produce, we have a really nice contract with Bon Appetit, the dining service, and they will take pretty much anything we produce and pay us market price.
And then, have you guys identified other community gardens or garden areas in the Appleton area that you guys connect resources to or build networks with?
We do. So that really started out with Quiney, who will be at the Young Farmers panel tomorrow, even though he's not a young farmer. He's just great. And so he's been a really, really great resource for us. He's someone we can call and ask about like pest problems or frostates, anything like that. And we also have established a connection with him, which we haven't done this year, but have done in years past, where we go out and plant like a ton of garlic or something like that, and in exchange for the land, he gets half and we get half. Or we can go out there and learn how to press cider, or just do a bunch of things like that. And also, there are I'm trying to think what it's called, the Community Garden Partnership in Appleton, which we've worked with on composting projects. And then also Riverview Gardens is starting, which Orrin Jacobson, the co-director of this conference, is a very prominent figure in, and that's going to be a really large urban farm. And so many Lawrence students are getting involved, volunteering, helping plan, like organizing the youth corps, organizing the CSA, things like that. So we're getting pretty integrated, and the longer we've been around, the more and more that's been happening. We've also helped establish gardens at some local elementary schools and high schools, and then bring them into our garden as well.
Sure.
So with your winter production, do you sell that to campus as well, or is that just for students?
We do. I'm not sure how much we're producing now, but it tends to go to the housing cooperatives on campus. Slug actually has a correlated house, so that has a food cooperative meal plan, and so they tend to, because they're on different financial systems, they tend to buy from Slug House, buys from Slug Garden, so they are eating, I think, the majority of their winter greens. Any other questions?
Do you have any classes at Lawrence that use the garden at all, like biology courses or an class?
I know, that's a good question. I know, so a tutorial has been set up in which it happens once every couple of years, and it's like Introduction to Sustainable Agriculture, and that's what that feasibility study was from, and it's it's like a series of in-class lectures as well as experiential learning. I've seen art students down there drawing. I think sometimes there's like soil testing, but it's not integrated that much.
You mentioned the community outreach for going on starting gardens in the high school and elementary schools. What kind of issues do you guys have getting those started, and how do they maintain over the summer when the kids aren't going to school?
Well, that's actually, I wouldn't say didn't have issues getting them started. We've mainly been a group that people come to because they're walking by, they see our garden to be successful, and they have like the staff and they have the interest, and they just want our help like laying out the garden or figuring out the logistics of it all.
I was wondering to what extent faculty and staff assist students in both the daily operations and the planning aspects of Slug Garden?
Right now, 1% of our stuff is done. We have an advisor, Jeff Clark. He's actually leading a discussion session tomorrow about how to get a student garden started on your campus. And he was pretty instrumental in working with a group of students to start the Slug Garden. And helps them a lot at first, but our knowledge has gone above his. And so we do all our planning, we organize everything, so it's all student run.
How about the initial land allocation of the garden space? Was that mainly for homes, or was it faculty?
It was the same Slug advisor, Jeff Clark, as well as a group of 5 students. And this was just where they chose. It was just the hill grass went all the way down. It was just a grass space.
How have you guys dealt with leadership turnover? So it's a college, you graduate, move on. How do you maintain and I guess I don't know if you mentioned how long this garden's been in existence.
This garden was started in 2005, is when they started the planning of it. And so as far as leadership goes, it has been, it's had different turnover levels of success, I'd say. Hava, standing over right there, is our current garden manager. And so what has happened, I know the garden manager before her was the only person who was interested in the job. And now it's become set up so he became the manager for 2 years, and as he realized, I'm a senior, I'm going to graduate, finding another person who's younger to train for the year, half the year, and kind of indoctrinate into the slow way of doing things, like learning out how to fill the invoices or who to talk to with the cafeteria, and really teaching them hands-on. And then as Hava goes into her senior year next year, she'll do the same thing. We also have just like a campus share that we share all our documents in, and anyone in the organization with the garden manager's permission can have access to all the documents. And in there is, our layout, our crop rotation for the last 4 years, things like that. I'd say it could go smoother, but it's getting better.
It's tough.
Sophie, how do you recruit these students? Where they just come to you?
It's a combination of the two. So usually we have, at the beginning of the year, I'm not sure how it is at a lot of schools, but there's like the orientation period and it's a week. And they have, some structured events, and we've managed to weasel our way into those structured events. Volunteer coordination group on campus, or they're actually faculty, they send a group of students down to the garden to volunteer. And then we also have sometimes potlucks, fires, things like that. But really, we get a lot of interest. There is a activities fair. Every person every organization, has a table that wants it. We always have a great table with raspberries. We bring all our farm tools, and wear crazy clothes and flowers and things like that, and really grab a lot of people's attention. And usually, a lot of them come to us.
I have a question. We're trying to start a garden at our university. We're trying to start with composting first. Mm-hmm. But a big thing is that people are concerned with is vandalism and how to keep the garden safe. And so people want to just go through it and just rip everything apart, like log work. How do you put security around it, or how?
For the garden in general, are you saying, or?
Yeah.
Well, we haven't really had any problems with vandalism, to be honest. I'm not really sure what area, but I know I don't think I haven't heard of that being a problem in any sort of urban or student garden. I know I read Novella Carpenter's book, Farm City, and she was really excited to pick a pumpkin or something. One day she came out and it was gone, and one of her neighbors had cut it off. But I don't think it's made a significant impact. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if that's what you were asking.
I guess since you haven't had to deal with it, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, that's not something. Have you had any experience with people bringing that up?
Yeah, I can sort of speak to that. So we are a very small campus, only 1,500 students, and because the garden is so visible and pretty well known, I think people have respect for it. Either they respect it or they're pretty apathetic and they don't care. So we have, I think our single incident of vandalism was somebody came down and drew a star on one of our wheelbarrows with spray paint. But in terms of outright destruction, we've had 0 in my time at Lawrence. So I think that we can chalk that up to the fact that we do try to involve the campus community. We are very visible. All of our produce goes to the cafeteria. And I think the fact that students can see that very obvious connection gives them respect for the garden as a part of the campus, as any other part of the campus might be. We're an established area, we're an established group, and I think people really look at that and have some respect for the area.
Also, campus security is constantly driving down that road, and so they keep a lookout. People have gotten security called on them and wandering around the garden at night, even if there's someone.
Can I add to that? We have had some at our campus, and it's mostly just some people taking things. So if we happen to catch them at that, we invite them to come to the the campus. We invite them as a community. We say, you know, we are growing these vegetables or this food as a community. So if you want to partake in the harvest, you need to, you know, come and be part of the community.
You mentioned that you sell some of your produce to the dining services, and I know that some universities a lot contract food supply companies, and so they have, you know, certain limitations in that contract. I'm wondering if you have that issue or.
So Bon Appetit actually wrote it into their system that they are trying to source more local foods. And so they do contract, but they are trying to be ahead of the other dining services and be responsible. So there is a portion, but that has not been a problem. We make up such a small percentage of the food that they're giving there, maybe like 2% or something like that. So when they use our food, they usually are like, these are slug greens, or like, this is, you know, slug spinach and onions on this pizza, something like that, and put up a little marker, but it's such a small percentage that we haven't had any sort of impact. Which is discouraging, but
Does Bon Appetit actually purchase from other local producers, or is it only from Southern?
They do. When you go down there for lunch, you'll see a chalkboard when you come in, and it's like, our cheese is from this place. The meat on this is from this place. So they are purchasing from stuff in Wisconsin. They also produce a lot of local fruit in the fall. Like there's a lot of apples, things like that from Wisconsin. So.
What type of systems do you utilize for transportation from the garden to where you're selling?
Our hands. So when we sell, we're usually just walking it down here. Is that what you're asking? Like?
Yes, so where is the cafeteria located?
The cafeteria is at the bottom of this building. So literally just, you can go off the garden, across the road, and like up the stairs in the bottom. So we usually, carry it, 5-gallon buckets, boxes, things like that. We also have a negotiation with facility services to use a truck of theirs. It's this big, old, like rusty, about to fall apart truck, and that is how we carry heavier things like compost, broom ash. We have some wagons, wheelbarrows. But it's never been too much, and you just get 4 or 5 people to follow you, make a couple trips. Yeah.
I'm in charge of the cooking club in my campus, and I'm wondering if you do any cooking related to this and educational outreach and responsibility from just in your local club.
We do kind of informally. Now that Slug has a house, there is a kitchen, and so we'll have a variety of potlucks where we invite they tend to be younger members, people who aren't really knowledgeable about producing things that come from our garden, and pair them with usually a house member that is some expert chef. And they'll work together to create a meal that will then bring to the potluck. That's like a thank you potluck for all our volunteers